Today I'll be talking about Bernard Shaw and Jacques Derrida, a controversial 20th century French-Algerian philosopher. Derrida seems to be an unlikely partner for Bernard Shaw, who certainly never heard of Derrida, and Derrida, as far as we know, was not interested in Shaw. The two men had very different interests. Shaw was deeply involved with contemporary issues like war, poverty, censorship, health, religion, and education. Derrida, on the other hand, focused primarily on abstract ideas. He's famous for having coined the words deconstruction and difference. Why then do I think it's important to discuss Shaw and Derrida together? One answer is that many popular notions about Derrida are simply wrong. Both men had a strong commitment to truth-telling, as we can see in this quote from a 1988 interview. The value of truth is never contested or destroyed in my writings, but only reinscribed in larger, more stratified contexts. Second, both men were intensely interested in what Derrida called the problem of language, the way it complicates our lives in ways we don't expect. Third, another Shavian has already made a strong case for taking Derrida seriously. Dick Dietrich's article, Deconstruction as Devil's Advocacy, a Shavian Alternative, amounts to a graduate-level course in postmodern language ideas, in my opinion. Here's a marked-up page from my copy. Most important, in my view, is that both men produced formidable critiques of the Socratic Platonist philosophy that has been a bedrock of Western philosophy. Derrida's critique appeared in an important essay called Plato's Pharmacy. Shaw's critique was embedded in a play that I'll be discussing in a couple of minutes. Those critiques amounted to a philosophical earthquake. We're still feeling the effects today. But that raises another problem. If Shaw never heard of Derrida, how could he have come up with the same critique? One answer is that artists often grab on to new ideas before philosophers start working with them. There's something else that, in my opinion at least, clinches the case for bringing Shaw and Derrida together. Both men were lifelong Marxists. Nowadays, we tend to associate Karl Marx with the failed economics of the Soviet Union. We may forget that Marx was intensely interested in language, as was Shaw, and that Marx's ideas continue to influence many important thinkers today. When I was in high school, I read a best-selling book by an American Marxist that changed my life. Countless women were affected the same way I was. That writer was Betty Friedan, and the book was The Feminine Mystique. Friedan was an avowed Marxist in high school and college. Her book is a classic Marxist challenge to an ideology. Ideology is one of two words that were central to Marx's thought that we're going to talk about today. They were central to Shaw and Derrida as well. The second word is natural, which we'll discuss in a moment. An ideology is a set of shared beliefs. Ideologies are useful because they unite people in thought and action. But powerful forces in society sometimes promote false or misleading ideologies that suit their own goals at the expense of people who are less powerful and important. Think about churches, businesses, and government. Here are some examples of past ideologies. Slavery is essential to economic prosperity. War is noble and glorious. Women are happiest when they devote all their time and energy to homemaking. Churches are run by selfless men who make God's work their only priority. Because ideologies are both pervasive and unconscious, they can condition us to ignore evidence that these beliefs aren't working for us. Ideologies are hard to challenge because over time they seem like common sense. That brings us to our second word, natural. Think of all the vanished ideas and institutions that were once considered natural, and permanent. Of course, marriage is between a man and a woman. Of course, we have a hereditary monarchy. Of course, indigenous groups don't have the same rights that white people do. The word natural raised red flags for our Marxist trio, Karl Marx, Bernard Shaw, and Jacques Derrida. But natural was a foundational word for Socrates and Plato, and it helped set up an important binary system for them. The stage was set for a philosophical battle in the 20th century. Here are 4 of those binary Platonist pairs: natural, artificial, authentic, fake, legitimate, illegitimate, and stable, chaotic. Within each category is a cluster of related words. The good terms are on the left: natural, essence, authentic, father, and so on. The bad terms are on the right, including performance, fake, unstable, illegitimate, and chaos. In this slide, I've added the all-important word language, and I put it in the middle because Socrates and Plato were ambivalent about it. To them, speech was good language because it was natural and came from the heart. Writing, though, was bad language because it could be performative and experimental. As I said, this ideology endured for 2,000 years. But then, starting with Marx and other thinkers like him, there was a shift. In this slide, I've replaced good with Plato and Socrates. I've replaced bad with Marx, Shaw, and Derrida, who saw value in some of those supposedly bad terms. For example, Derrida pointed out that concepts like legitimate, authority, lineage, and ordained may not help us make good decisions and adapt to change. Old ideas aren't always good ideas. We should judge each idea on its merits, not its source. Old wise men aren't always right. Derrida also pointed out that essence, one of the bedrocks of Platonism, is a problematic word. Humans are complicated beings. Instead of searching for an unchanging inner core, we should be experimenting, exploring, and inventing. That's how hidden human potential is discovered. I don't have time to give you Derrida's entire critique today, but you get the idea. In this slide, I've put some of these Socratic and Platonist terms into a box on the left. The Marx, Shaw, Derrida terms are in another box on the right. So, on the left, we have Platonist values like essence, legitimate, and lineage. On the right, we have Derridian words like perform, fake, and risk. I've again put the word language in the middle because it was so important to both sets of philosophers. If you use your Shavian eyes to look at these word groups, you'll find yourself in the realm of Pygmalion. And if you track these concepts while you're reading the play, you will discover a fully developed Derridian argument happening in the discussions between Higgins and Eliza. We're not just talking about a Shavian acorn that grew into a Derridian oak in later years. The oak is right there inside Pygmalion. We hear key Platonist and Derridian ideas at the center of the clashes between Higgins and Eliza. They argue endlessly about language, performing, essences, faking, and taking risks. We realize that Pygmalion is not just the story of a speech teacher and his pupil. Shaw has plunged us into a debate about philosophy. I've written an article for the Shaw Annual that does explore this Platonist-Derridian debate in Pygmalion in some detail, based on, of course, Shaw's play. There's a link on your handout. I want to mention a production detail that surprised me. In the stage directions for My Fair Lady, Lerner and Lowe placed a bust of Plato into Higgins' study. Shaw didn't put it there, and yet it perfectly represents one of the deeper issues in the play. I'd love to know what Lerner and Lowe were thinking. Did they pick up on the philosophical themes in Shaw's play? I want to emphasize that Derrida and Shaw and Marx and others before them didn't try to demolish the old Platonist ideas. Instead, they reminded us that our philosophical ideas don't always sort themselves into tidy either or, good, bad categories. Life flows back and forth from one to the other. I think that's one reason we like Henry Higgins so much, in spite of his faults. He keeps putting his toes into the water of new ideas and then backing away. Before we move on to another Derridian idea, I want to answer a question that often comes up when I talk about Marx, Shaw, and Derrida. This is the question. If these issues were so important to Shaw, why did he explore them in only one play? The answer is that Shaw didn't do that. There's another Shavian play with a strong Derridian element, Major Barbara. Look at what happens when you apply one of our binary categories to Major Barbara. Every Andrew Undershaft since James I has chosen a foundling to be the next heir to the munitions factory. Are you hearing the words fatherless and illegitimate? Each Andrew Undershaft wants to be sure that the business is always embracing fresh, new ideas. So now we're getting away from ordained and hierarchy, and we're embracing risk. Right in that munitions factory, that is a Derridian policy. But guess what happened? The Derridian policy vanished the moment the latest foundling arrived each time. He is always quickly put in his place. It's business as usual, Socrates and Plato. Adolphus Cousins is the latest foundling. As soon as he's named the next heir, he starts talking about making changes. Well, that's why they wanted him, isn't it? And yet he's instantly shot down. Here's Cousins. I shall sell cannons to whom I please and refuse them to whom I please. So there. And here is Andrew Undershaft, of course, Barbara's father. From the moment when you become Andrew Undershaft, you shall never do as you please again. I don't think Andrew is the absolute genius that Shaw and many critics have taken him to be. And I have an important critic on my side, Eric Bentley. But there's something else here that's more important than whether I'm right or wrong about Andrew. I'm suggesting that one way to keep Shaw fresh and relevant is to find new lenses for viewing his plays. Shaw was a visionary. I suspect that almost any idea that comes along is going to be relevant to GBS. I believe that 100 years from now, Shaw scholars will be finding new depths in his plays that we haven't even dreamed of. I hope that some of you in this room will be doing that excavating. Trust your own Shaw. We have only a few minutes left, and I'd like to touch on two other Derridian topics that also interested Shaw. One is the slippery nature of language. We've all heard English teachers say that if you get the grammar right, your message will be understood. Remember, I taught English myself for many years. It seems like common sense, but Shaw and Derrida would vigorously disagree. Luckily, we all have access to a wonderful resource for exploring this issue, the comics pages in our newspapers. We all know that I lost my license can have two meanings. You misplaced it, you lost it in a legal procedure. But Kevin Fitch in the Dustin comic strip doesn't seem to know that. We're familiar with the reminders in public bathrooms about washing our hands. But have you ever thought about what those signs are really telling you to do? You can't wash your hands yourself. An employee has to do it. Much of what we call human error and carelessness can be laid, at least partially, at the door of language. My husband and I once ordered a pizza with peppers and were served a pepperoni pizza instead. Let's look at a Shavian example of the slippery nature of language. In Act 2 of Pygmalion, Eliza has come to Wimpole Street to ask for speech lessons. Higgins gives her a hard time, and soon Eliza is crying. Higgins hands her his handkerchief and tries to teach her how to use it. Eliza says, "What's this for?" And Higgins says, "To wipe your eyes. Remember, that's your handkerchief and that's your sleeve." When Higgins reaches over to retrieve his silk handkerchief, Eliza refuses to let it go. "He gave it to me," she declares. She has a point. He did say, "This is your handkerchief." But the word your can also be used to point to an object in a general way, and that's where the confusion lies. A tour guide might say, for example, "There's your Brooklyn Bridge. There's your Statue of Liberty." Incidentally, this use of your is an old one. It appears in the gravedigger scene in Hamlet. I'm going to introduce one more Derridian Shavian idea that deserves far more attention than we can give it today. It's the proposition that a language ideology is hidden inside our heads. Now, I gave a talk about this at the Shaw Symposium last summer, and there is a link to the talk on your handout. It's an unconscious belief system with vast social and political consequences. At the center is the belief that we have a moral obligation to speak and write good English. If we use language carelessly, life as we know it will come to an end because we will lose our ability to communicate. Henry Higgins is a true believer in that ideology, but surprisingly, Bernard Shaw was not. And this is an amazing quote from Shaw. "When an English child says, 'I think and I goed,' it is just as well understood as if it said, 'I thought and I went.' Pidgin is as useful as the English of Milton and much more concise. Our craze for standards of correctness, pushed as it is to make any departure from them a punishable moral delinquency, wastes years of our lives." Well, is there any need for standard English today? I would say, of course there is. I spent my career teaching English. Effective social tools, like good manners, are always useful. Bernard Shaw studied an etiquette book when he was a young man. But "thou shalt not misplace a semicolon" does not carry the same weight as "thou shalt not steal." The ideas of Bernard Shaw and Jacques Derrida have intrigued me for many years. I hope you found these ideas stimulating as well today. Thank you.